Penn State football fans, welcome to another episode of the Blue White Breakdown Podcast, PennLive's Penn State football podcast. Johnny McGonigal. For those of you who are not viewing this and you're listening to it, Johnny is rocking his Phillies baseball cap. I am rocking my Dallas Cowboys visor. But that probably is not anything that interests you. But the Phillies are very much on the minds of many people in the state of Pennsylvania, many people on the Penn State football beat. We're taping this on around 3 o'clock on Tuesday, reacting to James Franklin's Tuesday news conference. And Johnny, James was asked about 17 different ways about the quarterback position, Sean-Clifford, Drew Allar, the future, what it's going to look like on Saturday at Indiana, what it might look like for the rest of the season. James was certainly ready for the questions that were coming. I thought a couple of things were a little interesting, but maybe that was just me. What was your, I know you wrote about this already, but what was your main takeaway for how James Franklin handled, now that Penn State's lost to Ohio State and Michigan, how James Franklin handled the Drew Allar, Sean-Clifford questions?
Yeah, Bob, the Phillies hat I'm wearing, it's the Phillies World Series hat. I just got it in the mail. I had to bust it out. I figured, let's not wear the ratty old hat I've had for years. For this podcast on this occasion.
You're looking great.
Thank you. I can't say the same about your Dallas visor, but here we are. But no, on the issue of Drew Allar and Sean-Clifford, that was obviously going to be the top topic of conversation in James Franklin's Tuesday news conference. And I ended up, I think, asking the first non-quarterback question on the call. I was like 6 questions in by the time they called on me on the Zoom. So, for a story I'm doing on Olu Fashanu. But, Drew Allar, a lot of people want him to start. And not everyone. Not every Penn State fan is calling for him to take the reins and take over. There's still a faction of the fan base that is fine with Sean-Clifford riding things out. And there's a faction that's not. And so it's a push-pull argument kind of right now. And it's an interesting choice, an interesting decision that James Franklin has. It's one of the most important ones he's had in his 9-year tenure as Penn State's head coach, determining the present and the future of this program. And, the way he put it is the way he's put it in the past weeks, is that they're going to keep, riding the guy that they think gives them the best chance to be 1-0 each week. And he didn't say for certain that Clifford is that guy this week. He said that as it has in the past, it's always been based on practices, and Penn State up until this point hasn't practiced. But, look, the last 8 weeks they've trotted Clifford out there, and he's been that guy. So, the one thing I did think that was pretty interesting in what he said was, he said that he's had conversations around the quarterback situation with both coordinators, Manny Diaz and Mike Yurcich, with Ken Wissenhunt, who's an offensive analyst on the team this year, former NFL head coach. He said that it's not just his decision; it's everyone's decision on what they're doing at quarterback. So that's one thing. Then the other thing is he said that he thought that it was possible, or that it wasn't mutually exclusive, that you can both prepare for the future and try to win now. And I think that's really the crux of the argument, or the choice that he has between Allar and Clifford. So I was curious what you thought about what he said there specifically.
Yeah, there's so much to get to with James and his quarterbacks, how he's handled his quarterbacks in the past, just his very nature and how he's kind of handled himself. He's now in his 9th year. It's interesting to me that he uses the word, whenever he uses, by the way, Johnny, just as a lookout, Rich Scarcella asked the first question, and I don't really think James was, for whatever reason, James seemed a little put off by the way that Rich phrased the question. It was a perfectly fair question, just about, I think, the remainder of the season and maybe playing Drew Allar more. And I would say that I don't know that I think there's a middle ground. Like, I don't know that Penn State fans necessarily are determined to see Drew Allar start the rest of the season. I think what they want to see is him play meaningful snaps, and that would entail James Franklin doing something he doesn't do a lot of, and that's playing two quarterbacks. I think Frank Ladani asked him about that, but I don't necessarily know. I think Penn State fans could live with a closing 4-game regular season stretch if Drew Allar was going to play in every game and play meaningful snaps. I don't know that maybe, just completely pull the chute on Sean-Clifford's career, but I do think there's middle ground. But the way that James is, I don't know about you, Johnny, but I thought he's going to great lengths, right? He had this all set up about, hey, it's not just about what I think about Sean-Clifford. I want to make sure I'm fair. So I talked to Manny Diaz. I talked to Mike Yursich, I think, who really was one of the guys behind Drew Allar's recruitment. I talked to Ken Wisenhunt, who's an offensive analyst. He's got a lot of his resume in the NFL is extensive. He knows what he's doing. Danny O'Brien, quarterback at Maryland. He's played them. I talked to all these guys, and we're all kind of on the same page without revealing what that is. But here's my question. Who is going to bang the table for Drew Allar if James Franklin says, hey, what do you think about the final 4 games? Who is going to stand up to James and say, we might have this wrong. I think it's time to go with Drew. I thought it was a kind of one of those, it was one of those scenarios where James asked the question, but he knew what the answer was going to be coming back.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's how I view it too. And it would be interesting to be able to talk to those other guys like Wisenhunt and O'Brien and Yursich, just even in an off the record scenario or off to the side, like, hey, so like, what do you really think? Are you really backing this? Because it does feel like one of those scenarios. And look, we don't know what that decision is going to be. Maybe Allar comes out and starts against Indiana. Maybe that's right. What they decided to do out of those conversations. I guess we'll have to wait and see on Saturday, but all signs point to it being Clifford again, just given what we've heard and seen Franklin do in the past in this season. So he said that he thought that Clifford played well. I think the exact words were he said he looked really good, and there were some scenarios. Played his tail off. That's what it is. Played his tail off against Ohio State. 3 touchdowns, 371 yards, also 4 turnovers, the strip sack and 3 picks. And Franklin acknowledged that there were 4 to 6 plays that you have to get rid of. But it feels like he says that every week. And to this point, those plays haven't been expunged, from Sean-Clifford's game. That's been what's held him back as a quarterback, not just this season, but in years past, is the turnovers and not that any turnover is timely, Bob, but the untimely ones, the ones that you really can't afford. So we'll see. I was asked this week in our mailbag, and we talk about, just getting Allar more playing time, whether that's starting him or not. And I do think that there's a scenario and something that Penn State can borrow from Medina High School when Drew Allar was a sophomore and was the more talented guy on paper, but was stuck behind a veteran quarterback. And what they did was they played the veteran 2 or 3 series, and then they put Allar in for a series. And just to get him, really reps against the first team defense, because sometimes in blowouts and garbage time, you see, not only is the second team offense coming in, but the second team defense is coming in to get reps against them. So you'd like to see Allar in high leverage situations. You'd like to see him against first team defenses, even if it is Indiana, Rutgers, Michigan State, and Maryland during this closing stretch, and then hopefully see him, grow some more during bowl practices and whatever bowl game Penn State plays in. So I think there's this balance between wanting to respect what Sean-Clifford's done as a 6-year senior, but also looking to the future. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how James threads that needle through the final 4 weeks.
Yeah, I don't even know how many high leverage situations they're going to be down the stretch.
Yeah.
Probably another maybe argument for more of Drew, but I don't know if you picked up on this, and maybe this is just me and my bizarre attitude and sense of humor, but I don't know if you caught this, but he also got so the writers were trying to get him to give up some more information, and he was talking about practice, and he was talking about how lucky we are to get to see them, because if you look around, not a lot of people get to see practice, and I'm not sure that Penn State really gives us a big availability, but to credit to James Franklin, he does make practice available every Wednesday for 10 to 15 minutes. And he is right, not a lot of other people do that. But writers are looking for a way in to like talk about Drew and where Drew's at, because even though there are windows where we get to see Penn State practice, I don't know that there's a lot of opportunities for us to see Drew Allar getting first team reps. But
there's not a lot of substance in those practice sessions, to be honest. I mean, you see who's available, you see some stuff, but you're not seeing Allar in 7-on-7s or really a lot of good individual drills or anything like that.
Yeah, I think James Franklin caught himself, but he slipped up because he was asked about Drew Allar, and he started to tell this story about the season opener before the game started, and Joel Klatt was standing next to him on the field watching Drew go through warm-ups, and it wasn't even Joel. James is talking about Drew being this physical specimen with elite arm talent, and he's also got a quick release, and he's got all these things going for him. And I think James caught himself because he never said what Joel Klatt said, what he thought of Drew Allar. He just kind of ended the conversation because the more he talked, the more he was making a case for Drew Allar's physical gifts. And the story just kind of went cold. And I think he caught himself, but
well, not only that though, Bob, but he also said, he has tremendous arm talent, and some guys that have big arms aren't that accurate. He has shown to be accurate, and for a young kid, and I think Sean has been a big part of this. I think he's done a really good job of preparing. Sounds pretty good. Yeah. Sounds like he's checking all the boxes. Yeah. And the other thing too is that I forget who asked the question exactly, but James was asked. It might have been Tyler Donahue from 24/7. Asked, is Sean's status as a 4-time captain, does that factor into your decision to keep starting him? And James Franklin said flat out no, and that it's a performance-based thing, and that he's earned the right to be a captain from the players' votes during the offseason, but this is something that they decide based on performance. So because that's another thing too, whether or not that's completely true or not, just inherently that you might be more drawn to the guy who has the locker room and the respect of his teammates, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just another little aspect to this really confounding situation.
Yeah, and realistically, if you're going to make the decision to start Drew at some point, and maybe it's not this week, maybe it's after the Maryland game if they win 2 more to get to 8-2, and then they're looking at a road trip to Rutgers, which just got shut out by Minnesota and Michigan State. Who knows who's going to be left on Michigan State's roster by the end of the season after the tunnel incident and the police looking at the team, and they're definitely there's some dysfunction going on, I think, out there with the Spartans. But at some point, if you're going to make that decision, you can't really pull back from it. So when that time comes, you got to make the decision to give him all the first team reps, right? And that's going to start early in the week. And James is not going to reveal that. But I just feel like, Johnny, if that decision comes, once you make the decision to start Drew, there's no turning back, right? It's got to be his show. You're going to commit to the future. And I just don't think, especially because Penn State and James, I think James is aware that he signed the big contract. They went 4-5 in 2020. They went 7-6 last year. Lost 6 of their final 8. I think it really means it might not mean that much to the fans because they lost to Michigan and Ohio State. I think it means a lot to James to try and get to 10 wins, 10-2, because that's kind of validation. He is developing players at every other position. Quarterback, it's really hard to play too. He was asked about that. He's right. But I do think James has the number 10 in the back of his head. And then maybe let's see, the bowl game's almost like a different season, right? He's always kind of done that anything goes, I think, in bowl season. But I think for the remainder of this season, if Sean-Clifford is healthy, the way that Penn State prepares its quarterbacks and gives them the majority of the reps, it's going to be really hard to give Drew Allar more than a series or two because he just doesn't have like all of the practice work maybe that he needs.
Yeah, and I guess the hope is that you go into Indiana as 2 touchdown favorites and you put that thing to bed by halftime. An Indiana team that's really struggled in really every facet of the game. You come home and Maryland is a solid team, a good offense, but maybe you're able to get up. And again, in these 4 games, ideally you get up early. If you're not going to go like 3-1 in terms of like series, splitting them up, just get a big lead and then get Allar in. I do think 10-2 is important. Like I get where James is coming from when it comes to that. I understand even, the the fans who aren't all in on just, playoff or bust, because it seems like in college football across the board, that's kind of a mentality that's been now taken over the last handful of years. It's like, if you're not going to be in the playoff, it doesn't matter. The importance of getting there, for a Penn State, especially if they were to get to a playoff, I mean, that's huge. It's program changing.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of value in being 10-2, and not just if Allar's getting in, but you mentioned those other freshmen. There have been so many young contributors on this team, like an Apple Carter and Catron and Singleton and those guys. To be a part of a team that has that kind of success and gets to a New Year's Six bowl. And then for the seniors, not just Clifford, there's other seniors on this team, guys like PJ Mustafer, for them to go out the right way. So there's a lot of value really across the board, and then even recruiting too, to be able to go back out on the trail and say, hey, we went 10-2. Yeah, we had that little bit of a rough patch, but things are on the up here because we're 10-2 and we have all these young guys that we're going to take that next step in 23. So there's definitely a lot of value in going 10-2. I understand where that's coming from, but I don't necessarily think it should come at the expense of getting Allar on the field at all costs. Like, I feel like they really do need to take advantage of this window and get on the field, get him on the field.
Absolutely. And just real quick, Johnny, I know you did a really good profile of Drew's time in high school in Medina. You went out, you spent some time in the town, you talked to a lot of people. Do you think James, I'm sure James knows, but if Sean's going to be the guy who's going to play, 75%, 80% of the snaps, the final 4 games to get to 10-2, I would think behind the scenes, I think that James Franklin has got an open line of dialogue with Drew and his parents, making sure that everyone's on the same page. There's no question he's the future of the position, but I just didn't know if you had any kind of thoughts about maybe how Drew handles not being the guy. It was different in high school when he wasn't the guy. Eventually he was the guy and he turned into a superstar. But I just wonder how the kid's attitude is about this. And maybe I'm sure he's a good teammate and he knows that his time is coming, but I have to think that James and Mike Yursich are keeping the lines of communication open with Drew and his family as Penn State navigates this final third of the regular season.
Yeah, you would think. I mean, that would be the smart thing to do. And on Drew specifically, and what, going into his past and going to Medina and talking to his head football coach, Larry Laird there, and really breaking down, I mentioned in his sophomore year, he was clearly the more talented quarterback, but he wasn't the starter. He was friends with the guy who was ahead of him, a year ahead of him. And so it was a tough situation for Drew, and he didn't want to be too pushy. He's not the kind of kid that is just going to walk into practice and say, all right, like, I'm the guy, and really be cocky about it. His teammates, his coaches, administrators at the school all, described him as humble and really grounded and down to earth. And that comes from his parents and his upbringing. So he's got a really good head on his shoulders. And it ultimately took his head coach in a film session, one-on-one, when they're going over film and saying, hey, when are you going to, be the man? When are you going to take over? And sure enough, in 2 weeks he did, when he was prompted to do so, and performed lights out and became the prospect that everyone saw him become. But I think judging his character through the people that know him so well, this is a situation that seems like he's handling and was primed to handle well, and surely understood the situation when he came in, that when Clifford came back, that he would be the starter and all that. And you can even see Allar on the sidelines too. The Minnesota game, there was, after one of the touchdowns, Clifford comes back to the sideline. Allar comes running out to celebrate with them. Everything we've heard from Franklin to Mike Yursich to Clifford, even in the offseason, is that this quarterback room is really tight. Clifford, Veilleux, Allar, and Perbola, these guys are, they're friends, they're close, and they're growing together. And I think that does matter when that kind of culture and that kind of room is cultivated throughout the course of a season.
Yeah. Let's switch gears, Johnny, here on the Blue White Breakdown to another talented, he's still young, another young, talented player that you're going to be writing about later this week, Olu Fashanu, you actually asked about him at James's news conference, and James went into pretty good detail about all the things that he likes about Olu. There's been a lot of stuff on social media from talent evaluators, draft talent evaluators, about, hey, there's nothing fluky about what this third year player, this left tackle, has been doing. He's doing it every game. I mean, Dane Brugler was actually, before the season, he had seen him one game when he started against Arkansas, and I think Dane might have been on the bandwagon before maybe anyone, about, hey, a guy to watch this year, a young player to watch, Olu Fashanu, the left tackle at Penn State. And he's just gotten better and better and better. And James was asked about Olu a couple different ways, but I'm kind of thinking, Johnny, that maybe we're seeing the last season of Olu at Penn State. And the reason I say that is, this is his third year at Penn State. He's a young player. He's only 19. But the reason I say that is James keeps talking about his physical strength already. And that's usually the reason why you make the case that, hey, come back to school. You need to get bigger. You need to get stronger. But it sounds like James thinks he's pretty big and he's pretty strong already. So I just wonder, I know that James met with his parents on Sunday about, the future. What's your kind of main takeaway from Olu? And I know that you got some stuff coming on him a little later in the week.
Yeah, the thing with Olu is, just his maturity and the way that he has handled this season so far. He's 19 years old. He started the Outback Bowl, but had never been in this kind of scenario before. The traits, the tools, all the draft words you want to use, the quickness, everything that he has from a physical standpoint is what you want from an NFL standpoint, from what you're looking at as a draft evaluator, whether you're a coach, scout, or GM. And his tools showed up at Purdue and then have really just continued to grow. That Auburn game was really good. I think he's only allowed 4 pressures in his last 4 games, according to PFF, which is just remarkable. I mean, he did a great job against Ohio State's DNs and 2 guys in Harrison and JT, the guy that blew up the game on the right side. Right. He did a really good job against those 2. And scouts are seeing that, draft evaluators are seeing that. I'm sure agents are seeing that and are trying to reach out and everything because they're allowed to. That's allowed now. And James said that Olu and his family has been handling this as well as they possibly can. That meeting on Sunday went really well, and they're asking all the right questions. He also said that Olu Fashanu can be an academic All-American. Like, that's how bright this kid is. And I think I don't correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure he would get his degree, I think, next fall. But that's one of those scenarios that even if you leave for the draft, you can always come back and finish up that work. And it seems like he has a good enough head on his shoulders that he would continue to do so. And so that's what you want to see. And again, it would be unfortunate for Penn State that, hey, maybe Allar's your guy next year, and you have all these offensive pieces coming back, and it would be really nice to have Fashanu as that, lockdown blindside blocker. He's just done so well at that spot this year. But at the same time, if you're getting a first-round grade as an offensive lineman, you got to go, and then you worry about everything else afterwards.
Agree 100%. It'll be interesting to see, how the season plays out for Olu. Also, we should mention he did leave the game, the Ohio State game. It looked like with a little bit of a physical issue. He couldn't finish, so we'll have to wait and see what his status is for Indiana. It's funny, Johnny. This is my segue. So James I won't talk about injuries. You guys asked me. I won't talk about injuries. And so what does he do? Hey, Kevon Lee's been hurt for the last 5 weeks. Like, he just volunteered that after, I think Audrey Snyder asked, we haven't seen a lot of him. How's he been handling the two freshmen, kind of getting all of the work and nothing from Key? Hey, well, he's been hurt for. I can't figure this guy out sometimes with injuries. He just reveals something when you never think it's coming. But if you ask him specifically about an injury, you're not admonished, but he's like, as you guys know, I don't talk about injuries unless I want to talk about injuries or their season-ending injuries. So I just can't figure him out with injuries anymore.
I tried to sneak in the Olu Fashanu injury thing because it was like, all right, hey, how have you seen him handle all this success, and then also, is he okay? And he gave me the spiel, which I was kind of expecting. I guess with the Kevon thing, because there was some rumblings, just some Twitter chatter about, oh, is he entering the portal, or it was a couple weeks ago, so maybe that was Franklin's way of just coming out and saying like no, like he's injured, like setting the record straight a little bit and putting any of that stuff to rest. But yeah, you never always know. It was the same thing with Pat Narduzzi the last 3 years too. You would say, "Oh, I don't talk about injuries," but then if you just kept asking, sometimes they would just give you stuff. So
yeah,
it's got to be persistent. And that's all it comes down to,
Fascinating. I think it's all how you ask James a question. I don't know if you're starting to see this, but some people ask questions a certain way, and it's like James is like, I like the way you put that. But if you don't ask the question the right way, it's not going to be a very long answer, and you see some of that as well. Just remember, moving forward, Johnny, if you ask a question and James' response is, I think that question's kind of interesting to me. That's code for I don't think he's really happy about the question. That's been my experience. But I just thought it was a really, really up and down press conference. But I do think I came out of it thinking that maybe Olu might be in his last year at Penn State. Kevon Lee is definitely not healthy. And I'm just my best guess is Sean-Clifford, if he's healthy, is going to be your starter, at least for the next couple of games. But I do think, Johnny, that it means a lot. It really means a lot to James and his coaches. And it should. No, it should. But to get to 10 wins after only having, 11 combined wins in 2020 and 2021, I do think that's something that they're definitely shooting for.
Absolutely. And look, as a press conference, I'm glad that there were so many questions about Allar and Clifford and stuff, because this was a discussion that is at the forefront of every Penn State fan's minds, especially after the Ohio State game. Because that first question right off the bat was, hey, now that you have 2 Big Ten losses, because that eliminates them from realistically from any Big Ten title contention, from any college football playoff contention. This is now this is a season that you're not going to compete for a national championship. So then what are you going to compete for? And it does mean a lot to Franklin and his staff and his players to now just go out there and get to 10 regular season wins, maybe 11 with a bowl game, and go out on a high like that. But it was something that needed to be addressed, and I'm glad that going into this stretch, we were able to as a beat and with Franklin just kind of have that conversation in a sense throughout the press conference and try to get a glimpse into his mind. It's tough sometimes to really get any information out of James. The way that he answers questions, sometimes he's very unwilling to give away information if he thinks that it's not in his best interest. But yeah, so we'll just have to see how he handles this next month of the season, and how he handles Drew and Sean and everything else, every other little bit of player personnel on this team.
Yeah, and Penn State fans, if you're wondering, it's really early to speculate what a 10-2 season might get Penn State as far as a bowl. I can tell you that the Citrus Bowl was well represented inside Beaver Stadium in the press room after the Ohio State game. And you think about Ohio State and Michigan, and it looks like the flavor of the year in the Big Ten West might just end up being Illinois. I mean, I think Penn State would come in the pecking order 4th, right? Depending on who's in the playoff, who's going to the Rose Bowl, whatever. And that might end up being – there's a pretty easy scenario where I think Penn State could end up in the Citrus Bowl. I don't know how fans would feel about that. I personally love Florida and Orlando, but there is a lot of football left to play, and things can change in a hurry. You never know. My dream is to go to Nashville, but I think that's a little bit too far down, Johnny. Any other takeaways for you from James Franklin's Tuesday presser? It really was. It was dominated by the discussion about Sean and Drew, and Olu was also. There were some questions about him as well. Anything else kind of stick out with you?
I think we just about covered it from a press conference standpoint. I think in terms of the possible bowls, if I'm able to go to Nashville twice in like a 3-month span, sign me up. I mean, I think that means a couple more losses for Penn State, so that would not be great for them. I think another scenario too that I've seen quite a bit would be the Orange Bowl, and that's if they end up being 3rd in that Big Ten pecking order. I think that's how it works out because there's still a chance that, even if Illinois gets to the Big Ten title game, gets blown out or something by Michigan or Ohio State, that Penn State would be ranked ahead of them at 10-2. So yeah, we'll just have to wait and see on that. But it's always fun to just, look ahead to bowl projections and see where we're going to be around the holidays and hopefully, fingers crossed, it's somewhere warm.
PennLive's Johnny McGonigal. Johnny, you've been a good sport talking about Penn State when I know the Philadelphia Fightins are on your mind. You got the Eagles. You got a lot on your plate, as do some other people. But it was good talking with you. You're going to have, I'm sure, a podcast with Dustin Hockenstall later this week. I'll have one with Dave Jones. It is Penn State, Indiana week. Penn State's a 2-touchdown favorite. We've talked about Drew. We've talked about Sean. We've talked about Olu. Good luck to your Phillies this week. I won't say anything else. I don't want to do anything to jinx you. So that's it for this edition of the Blue White Breakdown podcast. Remember to check with Johnny and Dustin later in the week and Dave and I later in the week on the Blue White Breakdown. But you guys have a great week. And Johnny, I just want to say go Phils.
Go Phils.